The stars had never seemed so cold to Ambassador Yanara as they did now. She stood at the observation window of the refugee ship Lasting Hope, watching the endless darkness stretch out before her. Behind her, in the cramped corridors and overcrowded chambers of the convoy, 40,000 of her people waited for an answer that might never come. The Veloxi were dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly and quietly, in the black space between worlds. Their ships were old. Their food was running out. Their power cells flickered and failed one by one. And nobody in the galaxy seemed to care. Yanara's skin glowed a soft, sad blue. Among her people, bioluminescence was emotion made visible. Blue meant sorrow. It meant loss. It meant the kind of grief that had no words. Every Veloxi on the convoy glowed the same color now. They had been glowing blue for months. 300 years ago, the Veloxi had been a proud civilization. Their homeworld, Velox Prime, had been a place of great beauty. Crystal forests stretched across continents. Bioluminescent oceans glowed with the light of billions of tiny creatures. The Veloxi had lived in harmony with their world, building cities that grew from the living crystal itself. Then the Keth Dominion came. The Keth were conquerors. They moved from system to system, taking what they wanted and destroying what they did not need. They had no use for crystal forests or glowing oceans. They wanted the minerals beneath the surface of Velox Prime. They wanted the rare elements that powered their war machines. The Veloxi had tried to negotiate. They had offered to share their world, to work with the Keth, to find a peaceful solution. The Keth had laughed at them. Then they had burned the crystal forests. They had poisoned the glowing oceans. They had cracked open the planet itself to get at the riches beneath. The Veloxi who survived did so only because they ran. They gathered what ships they could find and fled into the darkness of space. 40,000 souls out of a civilization of billions. That was all that remained. For 2 years, the convoy had drifted through the galaxy, searching for a new home. They had sent messages to every species they could reach. They had begged for help, for shelter, for even the smallest act of kindness. 17 species had responded. All 17 had said no. The reasons were always the same. Resources were limited. Times were difficult. The Veloxi had nothing to offer. They were poor. They were desperate. They were, in the cold language of galactic economics, a burden that no one wanted to carry. Yanara had stopped hoping after the 12th rejection. By the 15th, she had stopped feeling anything at all. Now, as she prepared to send yet another request for help, she felt only a tired emptiness. The message would go to a species called humans. Yanara knew almost nothing about them. They were young, by galactic standards. Their civilization had only achieved faster than light travel a few decades ago. They had a single planet and a handful of small colonies. They were not rich. They were not powerful. They were, in fact, almost as insignificant as the Veloxi themselves. But they were the last option. Every other species had already refused. The humans were all that remained. Yanara composed her message with practiced efficiency. She described the situation clearly and simply. 40,000 refugees, ships failing, food running out, requesting any assistance that could be provided. She did not beg. She had learned that begging made no difference. She simply stated the facts and waited for the inevitable rejection. The message was sent through the Galactic Refugee Council, the organization that was supposed to help displaced peoples find new homes. In reality, the council did little more than pass messages back and forth. They had no power to force anyone to accept refugees. They could only ask, and asking had not been enough. Yanara expected to wait days or weeks for a response. She expected silence followed by a polite refusal. She expected nothing. What she got was something else entirely. The response came in 6 hours. 6 hours. Yanara had never received an answer so quickly. She opened the message with trembling hands, her skin flickering between blue and yellow, between sorrow and desperate hope. The message was from a human named Amara Okonkwo. Her title was Director of the United Earth Refugee Initiative. The message was short and direct. Send us their coordinates. We're coming to get them. Yanara read the message 3 times. She did not understand it. The words were clear enough, but their meaning seemed impossible. Coming to get them? What did that mean? Was it a trick? A mistake? Some kind of cruel joke? She sent a reply asking for clarification. The response came within minutes. Ambassador Yanara, I understand your confusion. Let me be clear. Earth is prepared to accept all 40,000 Veloxi refugees. We are sending ships to escort your convoy to our planet. We are preparing facilities to house your people. We are gathering food, medical supplies, and everything else you might need. Please send your exact coordinates so we can reach you as quickly as possible. Your people have suffered enough. It's time for that suffering to end. Yanara's glow shifted to pure white. Among the Veloxi, white meant shock. It meant an emotion so strong that the body could not process it. It meant something that the mind could not accept. She read the message again. Then once more, all 40,000. No conditions. No negotiations. No talk of what the Veloxi could offer in return. Just a simple, direct offer of help. Yanara had been an ambassador for 50 years. She had negotiated with dozens of species. She had studied galactic politics and economics and social structures. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. She sent the coordinates. The news spread through the convoy like fire through dry grass. At first, no one believed it. The Veloxi had been disappointed too many times. They had learned to protect themselves from hope because hope was too painful when it was crushed. But then the human ships appeared on their sensors. There were dozens of them, then hundreds. Military vessels and civilian ships and cargo haulers and passenger transports. They emerged from faster-than-light travel in waves, surrounding the Veloxi convoy in a protective formation. Messages flooded the communication channels. Different voices, different languages, but all saying the same thing. Welcome. You're safe now. We're here to help. In the medical bay of the Lasting Hope, a Veloxi child named Kira watched the human ships through a small window. She was 7 years old. She had been born on the convoy and had never known any home except these cramped, failing ships. She had never seen a planet. She had never felt ground beneath her feet. She had never known what it was like to not be afraid. Her mother, Sela, held her close. Sela's glow was shifting rapidly between colors, cycling through emotions too fast to name, fear and hope and disbelief and something that might have been joy, if Sela could still remember what joy felt like. Mama, Kira said. Who are those people? Humans. Sela whispered. They're called humans. Are they going to hurt us? Sela watched the human ships forming their protective ring around the convoy. She watched the messages of welcome scrolling across every screen. She felt something crack inside her chest. Something that had been frozen solid for 2 years. No, little one, she said. I don't think they are. On Earth, the news of the refugee convoy had sparked something unprecedented. Amara Okonkwo had made her decision to accept the refugees without consulting the full United Earth Council. It was a risk. 40,000 aliens was a lot of people. Earth had its own problems, its own shortages, its own struggles. There would be opposition. There would be complaints. There would be people who said it was too much, too fast, too expensive. Amara did not care. She had seen the images from the Veloxi convoy. She had seen the children with their ribs showing through their translucent skin. She had seen the elderly lying in corridors because there were not enough beds. She had seen the desperation in Ambassador Yanara's message, the tired acceptance of someone who had stopped expecting kindness. Amara knew that feeling. Her grandmother had been a refugee once, fleeing a war-torn region of Africa. Her grandmother had known what it was like to be hungry, to be afraid, to be unwanted. Her grandmother had survived because strangers had chosen to help. Now it was Amara's turn to be that stranger. The public response surprised her. She had expected resistance. Instead, she got volunteers. Thousands of them. Then tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. Doctors signed up to provide medical care. Engineers offered to repair the Veloxi ships. Translators worked around the clock to learn the Veloxi language. Ordinary families opened their homes, their wallets, their hearts. A retired teacher in Germany organized a donation drive that collected enough warm clothing to outfit a small army. A restaurant owner in Thailand began researching Veloxi dietary needs so he could prepare safe meals. A group of college students in Brazil created a welcome video in the Veloxi language, spending weeks perfecting their pronunciation. The United Earth Council held an emergency session. Some members objected to Amara's unilateral decision. They talked about costs and logistics and political complications. They talked about the message it would send to other refugee populations across the galaxy. They talked about setting a precedent that Earth could not maintain. Amara listened to all of it. Then she stood up and spoke. 40,000 people are dying in space right now, she said. They have nowhere else to go. Every other species in the galaxy has turned them away. We can argue about costs and logistics and precedents, or we can do what is right. I know what my grandmother would have wanted me to do. I know what my daughter will be proud of me for doing. The question is, what will you choose? The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Earth would accept the Veloxi refugees, all 40,000 of them. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Refugee Council watched these developments with interest and confusion. The humans were a young species, barely significant on the galactic stage. Their economy was modest, their military was weak, they had no strategic interest in the Veloxi. They had nothing to gain from this gesture. Councillor Thren of the Mordai found the situation particularly puzzling. The Mordai were an ancient species, one of the founding members of the galactic community. They prided themselves on their rationality, their careful calculation of costs and benefits. Every decision they made was based on clear logic. There was no logic in what the humans were doing. Thren reviewed the data on Earth's resources. The planet was not poor, but it was not wealthy either. Accepting 40,000 refugees would strain their systems. It would cost money that could be spent on their own people. It would create social tensions and political difficulties. It was, by any rational measure, a bad decision. And yet the humans seemed almost eager to make it. Their news channels showed crowds of people celebrating the announcement. Their social networks were filled with messages of support. Their leaders spoke of compassion and duty and the fundamental dignity of all sentient beings. Thren did not understand. He filed a report with the council, noting the unusual human behavior for future study. Perhaps it was some kind of cultural peculiarity. Perhaps it would fade once the humans realized the true cost of their decision. Perhaps it was simply the foolishness of a young species that had not yet learned how the galaxy really worked. He would soon discover how wrong he was. On the lasting hope, Ambassador Yanara received a personal message from Amara Okonkwo. It was not an official communication, not a diplomatic statement. It was simply one person reaching out to another. Ambassador Yanara. The message read, I want you to know that you and your people are not alone anymore. I know that the galaxy has been cruel to you. I know that you have been rejected and ignored and treated as if you don't matter. But you do matter. Every single one of your 40,000 people matters. On Earth, we have a saying, no one is a stranger, just a friend you haven't met yet. I hope that we can be friends, Ambassador. I hope that Earth can be a place where your people find not just shelter, but home. We are preparing for your arrival. We are ready to welcome you. Please hold on just a little longer. Help is coming. Yanara read the message in her small cabin, alone. Her glow shifted through colors that she had not shown in years. Gold for warmth, pink for affection, green for hope, colors that she had forgotten her body could make. She thought about all the messages she had sent over the past 2 years. All the careful diplomatic language, all the detailed explanations of her people's suffering, all the logical arguments for why they deserved help. None of it had worked. 17 species had read her words and decided that the Veloxi were not worth saving. And then this human, this Amara Okonkwo, had read a simple request and responded with immediate, unconditional help. No negotiations, no conditions, no careful calculation of costs and benefits, just help, given freely, because it was needed. Yanara did not understand humans. She did not understand how a species could be so illogically, irrationally kind, but she was grateful. For the first time in 2 years, she was truly grateful. She began to compose a response to Amara's message. She wanted to find the right words, the perfect diplomatic language to express her appreciation. But the words would not come. After all the formal communications she had written, after all the careful phrases and official terminology, she found that she could not be formal anymore. Instead, she wrote simply, "Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, from every Veloxi on these ships, thank you. We will hold on. We will wait for you. And when we meet, I hope that I can find a way to show you what your kindness means to us." She sent the message. Then she went to find the convoy's communication officer. "Broadcast to all ships," she said. "Tell everyone. Help is coming. Real help. We're going to be okay." The message spread through the convoy in minutes. 40,000 Veloxi heard the news. 40,000 Veloxi began to hope again. And across the galaxy, on a small blue planet that most species had barely noticed, Hundreds of thousands of humans prepared to welcome strangers as family. The universe was about to learn something new about humanity. Something that would change everything. Kindness was coming, and it would not be stopped. The blue marble of Earth grew larger in the observation windows of the lasting hope. Ambassador Yanara stood at the same window where she had spent so many hours watching the cold emptiness of space. Now she watched something different. She watched clouds swirling over oceans. She watched continents painted in green and brown. She watched a world that was alive, beautiful, and waiting for them. Around the Veloxy convoy, human ships moved in careful formation. They had been escorting the refugees for 3 days now, guiding them through human space, protecting them from dangers that no longer existed but that the Veloxy still feared. The human pilots sent constant messages of encouragement. They shared music and stories. They asked questions about Veloxy culture and answered questions about Earth. A young human pilot named Marcus Chen had spent hours talking with Yanara through the communication channel. He had told her about his home in a place called San Francisco, about the bridge that glowed orange in the sunset, about the sea lions that barked on the piers. He had asked about Velox Prime, and Yanara had told him about the crystal forests and the bioluminescent oceans. "It sounds beautiful," Marcus had said. "I'm sorry you lost it." "Thank you," Yanara had replied. "But I think perhaps we are about to find something new." Now, as Earth filled the window before her, Yanara felt something she had almost forgotten. It was not quite hope. It was bigger than hope. It was the feeling of standing on the edge of something enormous, something that would change everything. The convoy entered Earth's atmosphere in the early morning hours, local time. They descended over an ocean that glittered with reflected sunlight. They passed over islands and coastlines and cities that sparkled with millions of lights. And then they saw what waited for them below. Thousands of people had gathered at the landing site. Thousands more lined the roads leading to the area. They held signs with messages of welcome in the Veloxy language. They waved lights and flags. They cheered as the convoy ships descended through the clouds. Yanara had expected quarantine zones. She had expected security checkpoints and medical screenings and long waits in holding areas. That was how refugees were processed in every other system she knew of. That was how civilized species managed the movement of populations. The humans had not read that manual. The first ship to land was a transport carrying families with young children. The ramp lowered, and for a moment, no one moved. The Veloxy inside were afraid. They had been rejected so many times. They had learned to expect cruelty. They did not know how to process the sight of thousands of smiling faces waiting for them. A human woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was old, her hair white and her face lined with years. She carried a bundle of warm blankets in her arms. She walked up the ramp slowly, gently, as if approaching a wounded animal. The first Veloxy she reached was a young mother, named Selah, holding her daughter Kira in her arms. The child was thin and weak from months of poor nutrition. Her glow was faint, barely visible. The old woman smiled. She did not speak, because the translators were still being set up. But she did not need words. She simply wrapped one of the blankets around the child, gently and carefully, and then she opened her arms to the mother. Selah did not move at first. She did not understand what was happening. No one had ever offered to embrace her. No one had ever looked at her with such warmth. Then the old woman stepped closer and wrapped her arms around both mother and child. She held them tightly, as if they were her own family, as if she had been waiting her whole life to welcome them home. Selah began to cry. Her tears were not water, like human tears. They were light, tiny drops of bioluminescence that fell from her eyes and sparkled as they hit the ground. She cried light, and she glowed gold, the color of overwhelming emotion. The crowd below watched in silence. Cameras captured the moment and broadcast it across the planet. Billions of humans saw a stranger embrace strangers, saw light fall like rain, saw the beginning of something new. Then the silence broke. The crowd began to move forward. Not rushing, not pushing, but flowing like water toward the ships. Hundreds of hands reached out to help the refugees down the ramps. Hundreds of voices spoke words of welcome in imperfect Veloxy or simple English. Hundreds of hearts opened to receive people they had never met. A firefighter from Brazil picked up a Veloxy child who was too weak to walk. The child weighed almost nothing. The firefighter cradled her gently and carried her toward the medical tents, tears streaming down his face. A group of teenagers from Japan had spent weeks making origami cranes. thousands of them, in the Veloxy colors of blue and silver. They pressed the paper birds into the hands of every refugee they could reach, explaining through translators that in their culture, cranes represented hope and healing. A chef from Morocco had learned to prepare meals that were safe for Veloxy digestion. He stood at a long table, serving bowl after bowl of warm food to refugees who had not eaten a proper meal in months. He did not speak their language, but his smile said everything. The medical tents were overwhelmed within the first hour. There were not enough doctors, not enough supplies, not enough beds, but humans kept coming. Off-duty nurses drove for hours to volunteer. Medical students skipped classes to help. Retired physicians came out of retirement. A Veloxy elder named Toram had collapsed shortly after leaving his ship. He had been holding himself together through sheer will for months, staying strong for his people. Now, finally safe, his body gave out. Human doctors surrounded him immediately. They did not have much experience with Veloxy biology. They did not have the right equipment or the right medicines, but they worked with what they had, adapting techniques, improvising solutions, refusing to let him die. Toram survived. When he woke 3 days later, he found himself in a clean bed in a human hospital. A young human doctor sat beside him, reviewing his charts. "Where am I?" Toram asked through the translation device. "You're in Geneva," the doctor said. "Switzerland. Earth. You're safe. My people? All 40,000 have been processed and housed. No deaths during arrival. Several medical emergencies, but everyone pulled through." The doctor smiled. "You Veloxy are tougher than you look." Toram's glow shifted to purple, the color of deep gratitude. "I don't understand," he said. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from us?" The doctor looked confused by the question. "Want from you? We don't want anything. You needed help. We could help. That's all there is to it. But the resources, the cost, we have nothing to give you. You don't need to give us anything," the doctor said. "You're our guests. You're welcome here. That's enough." Toram stared at her for a long moment. In his 70 years of life, he had never encountered a species like this. The Veloxy had been a generous people once, before the Keth destroyed their world. But even they had never offered so much to strangers without expecting anything in return. "What kind of species are you?" he whispered. The doctor laughed softly. "We're just humans," she said. "We're nothing special. We just try to do what's right." But Toram knew that she was wrong. There was something special about these humans, something that he could not yet name, but that he could feel in every act of kindness they showed. The news drones had been broadcasting continuously since the convoy arrived. The images spread across the planet and then across the galaxy. Alien observers watched with a mixture of fascination and confusion. On the Mordai homeworld, Counselor Thren reviewed the footage with growing disbelief. He saw humans weeping as they embraced strangers. He saw children offering their toys to refugee children they could not even speak to. He saw a species acting in ways that made no economic sense, no political sense, no logical sense at all. "Why are the humans crying?" his assistant asked. Thren did not know how to answer. In Mordai culture, crying was a sign of weakness, something to be hidden and overcome. The humans seemed to wear their emotions openly, without shame. They seemed to think that feeling deeply was something to be proud of. "I do not know," Thren admitted. "I do not understand these humans at all." On other worlds, other species watched with similar confusion. The Talari collective analyzed the human behavior patterns and found no logical explanation. The Renari Empire dismissed it as a publicity stunt that would fade once the costs became clear. The Keth Dominion watched in silence, calculating what this development might mean for their future plans. Only a few observers understood what they were seeing. Only a few recognized the power of what the humans were doing. Ambassador Yanara was one of them. She spent the first day after arrival walking through the refugee camps, but they were not really camps. The humans had converted stadiums and convention centers and university dormitories into temporary housing. Each family had their own space, their own privacy. There were play areas for children and quiet rooms for the elderly. There were counselors to help with trauma, and teachers to help with language. Everywhere Yanara went, she saw humans working alongside Veloxy. They were not guards or administrators. They were helpers, volunteers, friends. They learned Veloxy names and asked about Veloxy customs. They celebrated when refugees smiled and grieved when refugees cried. A human woman named Maria had attached herself to a young Veloxy girl named Kira. The girl was the one who had been wrapped in blankets by the old woman on the first day. Maria had been volunteering at the food station when Kira wandered over, curious about the strange creatures serving the meals. "Hello," Maria had said, kneeling down to the child's level. "What's your name?" "Kira," the girl had whispered, her glow a nervous pale blue. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Maria. Would you like to help me hand out food?" Kira had nodded shyly. For the next 3 hours, she had stood beside Maria, passing bowls to her people. By the end, she was glowing a soft, warm gold. Yanara found them together the next day. Maria was teaching Kira how to count in English. Kira was teaching Maria how to understand Veloxy colors. "Gold means happy," Kira explained. "Blue means sad. Purple means thankful. Pink means love. What about white?" Maria asked. "White means surprised. Very, very surprised." Maria laughed. "I bet a lot of your people have been glowing white since you got here." "Yes," Kira said seriously. "We did not know humans were so nice." Yanara watched this exchange from a distance. She felt her own glow shifting through colors too complex to name. There was gratitude, yes. There was wonder. There was something that felt almost like love. She thought about all the species who had rejected her people. She thought about the cold calculations of the Mordai, the indifference of the Telari, the silence of the dozens of others who had decided that 40,000 lives were not worth the trouble. Then she thought about these humans, these young, foolish, illogical creatures who had opened their arms without being asked, who had given everything without expecting anything in return. She did not understand them. She was not sure she would ever understand them, but she was grateful beyond words. That evening, Yanara met with Amara Okonkwo for the first time in person. They sat in a small office in the administrative center of the Geneva complex. Amara was smaller than Yanara had expected, a compact woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, but there was a strength in her, a quiet certainty that seemed to fill the room. "How are your people settling in?" Amara asked. "Better than I could have imagined," Yanara admitted. "I have been watching your volunteers. They work so hard. They seem to genuinely care." "They do care," Amara said. "That's why they're here." "But why?" "We are strangers. We are aliens. We are nothing to you." Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her desk and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a young African woman carrying a small child through a dusty landscape. The woman looked exhausted. The child looked afraid. "This is my grandmother," Amara said. 60 years ago, she was a refugee. War came to her country and she had to run. She walked for weeks with my father in her arms. She had nothing. She was alone. She thought she was going to die. Yanara looked at the photograph. The woman's eyes held the same tired desperation that Yanara had seen in so many Veloxy eyes. "Strangers saved her," Amara continued. "People who had no reason to help. People who gained nothing from helping. They gave her food and shelter and safety. They gave my father a chance to grow up. They gave me a chance to exist." She put the photograph away. "When I received your message, when I saw what your people were going through, I thought about my grandmother. I thought about how her life depended on the kindness of strangers, and I knew what I had to do." Yanara's glow was pure purple now, deep and rich with gratitude. "Your grandmother must be proud of you. She passed away 10 years ago," Amara said. "But I like to think she's watching. I like to think she knows." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Geneva, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In the distance, Yanara could see the lights of the refugee complex, could see humans and Veloxy moving together through the evening. "We will never be able to repay you," Yanara said finally. "Everything you have given us, everything you are doing, we have nothing to offer in return." Amara smiled. "You don't need to offer anything. You don't need to repay us. That's not why we're helping." "Then why?" "Because it's right," Amara said simply. "Because you needed help, and we could help. Because that's what it means to be human." Yanara did not know how to respond. She had spent 50 years as a diplomat, 50 years learning to navigate the complex web of favors and obligations that held galactic society together. Everything had a price. Everything required an exchange. That was how civilization worked. But the humans did not seem to know that. They seemed to live by different rules, rules that Yanara had never encountered before. She thought about the old woman with the blankets. She thought about the firefighter carrying the child. She thought about Maria and Kira, counting together in 2 languages. Perhaps, she thought, the humans understood something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Perhaps they knew a secret that was older than civilization, older than commerce, older than the careful calculation of costs and benefits. Perhaps they knew that kindness was not a transaction. Perhaps they knew that compassion was not a weakness. Perhaps they knew that the measure of a species was not in what they could take, but in what they were willing to give. Yanara looked at Amara Okonkwo, at this small, strong woman who had moved mountains to save strangers. She felt something shift inside her, something that had been broken for a very long time. "Thank you," she said, "from the bottom of my heart, from every Veloxi who will ever draw breath. Thank you." Amara reached across the desk and took Yanara's hand. Human skin was warm and soft, so different from Veloxi skin, but the gesture was universal. "Welcome home," Amara said, and for the first time in years, Yanara believed it. The footage spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within 72 hours of the Veloxi arrival, the images from Earth had been viewed more times than any event in galactic history. Species on 1,000 worlds watched humans embrace aliens they had never met. They watched volunteers work through the night to help strangers. They watched a young species do something that older, wiser civilizations had refused to do. On the Mordai homeworld, the footage played on every screen. Citizens stopped in the streets to watch. They saw the old woman with the blankets. They saw the firefighter carrying the child. They saw tears and light and joy. Counselor Thren watched from his office in the capital city. He had spent 3 days studying the human response, trying to find the hidden motive, the secret agenda, the logical explanation for their behavior. He had found nothing. His assistant entered with a report. "Sir, we've received over 2 million messages from Mordai citizens in the past day." "About what?" "About the humans, sir. About the Veloxi refugees." The assistant hesitated. "Many of them are asking why we didn't help. Many of them are asking why we said no when the Veloxi asked us for shelter." Thren's jaw tightened. "We had good reasons. Sound economic reasons. The cost-benefit analysis was clear." "Yes, sir. But the citizens are asking whether the cost-benefit analysis considered everything, whether it considered the cost of doing nothing, whether it considered what we were becoming as a species." Thren did not respond. He turned back to the screen, watching a human child share her lunch with a Veloxi child. The 2 girls could not speak each other's language. They did not need to. They were laughing together, glowing together, being children together. Something stirred in Thren's chest. He did not know what to call it. It was not an emotion that Mordai usually acknowledged. On the Teleri homeworld, similar scenes were playing out. The Teleri were a species of pure logic. They made decisions based on data and reason, never on emotion. They had refused the Veloxi refugees because the numbers did not support accepting them. But now, watching the human response, many Teleri were experiencing something unusual. They were feeling doubt. A young Teleri scientist named Vex spent hours analyzing the footage. She measured the expressions on human faces, the body language of volunteers, the reactions of Veloxi refugees. She ran the data through every model she knew. "It doesn't make sense," she said to her colleague. "Their behavior patterns suggest genuine emotional investment. They appear to actually care about these strangers." "That's not logical," her colleague replied. "They have nothing to gain. The refugees are a net negative to their economy. Their behavior is irrational." "Yes," Vex agreed. And yet what? Vex watched a human doctor working through her 3rd straight shift, refusing to rest while there were still patients to treat. The doctor's face was exhausted, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "And yet I find myself wishing that we were irrational too," Vex said quietly. Her colleague had no response. On Earth, the human response continued to grow. What had started as a government initiative had become a global movement. Social networks exploded with donation campaigns and volunteer sign-ups. Companies offered resources and expertise. Ordinary people found extraordinary ways to help. A 12-year-old girl in Canada named Sophie had seen the footage of the Veloxi children. They looked so thin, so fragile, so scared. Sophie wanted to help, but she had no money and no skills to offer. So she started drawing. Sophie was good at art. She drew pictures of Veloxi children playing in crystal forests, swimming in bioluminescent oceans, living in the beautiful world they had lost. She posted the pictures online with a simple message: "These are the children we're helping. Every dollar counts." Her campaign raised $10,000 in the first day, then 100,000, then 1 million. Within a week, Sophie had raised enough money to feed 100 Veloxi for a year. News outlets around the world told her story. When reporters asked why she had done it, Sophie shrugged. "They're kids," she said. "They lost their home. I wanted to help them feel better." In Morocco, a retired chef named Hassan had been watching the refugee coverage with growing frustration. The Veloxi could not eat human food. Their digestive systems were different. The emergency rations being provided were nutritious but bland and joyless. Hassan believed that food was love. Food was comfort. Food was home. These refugees had lost everything, but perhaps he could give them a small piece of joy. He spent weeks researching Veloxi biology. He experimented with ingredients that were safe for their systems. He failed dozens of times before he succeeded. But finally, he created dishes that were not just nutritious but delicious. Dishes that had color and texture and flavor. Dishes that made Veloxi eyes light up with wonder. Hassan traveled to Geneva with his recipes. He trained volunteer cooks. He stood in serving lines, watching refugees taste his creations, watching their glows shift from tired blue to warm gold. "This tastes like home," one elderly Veloxi told him through a translator. "I don't know how, but it tastes like home." Hassan did not speak Veloxi, but he understood. He simply smiled and offered another serving. These stories multiplied across the planet. In Japan, an organization of grandmothers knitted thousands of blankets using colors that matched Veloxi bioluminescence. In Brazil, construction unions worked for free to build permanent housing. In India, software engineers developed translation apps that could interpret Veloxi color speech in real time. In Australia, musicians composed songs using frequencies that Veloxi could feel, as well as hear. The Galactic Refugee Council watched all of this with growing unease. This was not how things were supposed to work. Refugees were supposed to be processed quietly, efficiently, with minimal disruption to the host society. They were not supposed to inspire global movements. They were not supposed to change cultures. They were not supposed to matter this much. The council called an emergency session to discuss the human situation. Representatives from 200 species gathered in the great chamber on the neutral world of Centrum. The session was broadcast across the galaxy. Councillor Thren of the Mordai spoke first. He stood at the central podium, his gray robes flowing around him, his face carefully composed. "The human response to the Veloxi refugees has been remarkable," he began. "In 72 hours, they have demonstrated a capacity for collective action that we rarely see even among older species. They have mobilized millions of citizens. They have generated billions of credits in donations. They have transformed what should have been a simple humanitarian operation into a cultural phenomenon." He paused, his eyes scanning the assembled representatives. "However, we must consider the implications of this behavior. The humans have set a precedent that cannot be sustained. They have created expectations that they cannot meet, and they have implicitly criticized every other species that made the rational decision to refuse the Veloxi. We should therefore discuss whether intervention is necessary, whether we should counsel the humans on the realities of galactic politics, whether we should help them understand that what they are doing is ultimately harmful to whom?" The voice came from the human delegation. Director Amara Okonkwo stood, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of the entire chamber. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Counselor," she continued, "but I would like to understand your position. You say that our response is harmful. Harmful to whom, exactly?" Thren blinked. "Harmful to the galactic order. Harmful to the economic systems that maintain stability. Harmful to the refugees. Is it harmful to them? Well, no, not directly, but to the humans who are helping. Is it harmful to them? In the long term, the economic strain. Counselor Thren, I respect your experience and your wisdom, but I have to be direct with you. Our people are not straining. They are thriving. Our economy has not collapsed. Our society has not crumbled. In fact, something remarkable has happened." Amara stepped forward, her voice carrying across the great chamber. "Our people have come together in a way that we haven't seen in generations. They have found purpose and meaning in helping others. They have discovered that the joy of giving is greater than the pleasure of keeping. They have remembered something that I think this council has forgotten. And what is that? Thren asked, his voice tight. That civilization is not about efficiency. It's not about optimization. It's not about calculating the precise cost-benefit ratio of every decision. Civilization is about people taking care of each other. It's about strangers, becoming family. It's about building a society where no one has to face the darkness alone. The chamber was silent. Representatives from 200 species watched the small human woman, with expressions ranging from confusion to contempt, to something that might have been hope. You say we gain nothing from helping the Veloxi. Amara continued. You are wrong. We gain everything. We gain the knowledge that when we saw suffering, we did not look away. We gain the certainty that our children will grow up in a world where kindness is valued. We gain the friendship of 40,000 souls who will never forget what we did for them. She looked directly at Thren. What did you gain by saying no, counselor? What did any of you gain? You saved some resources. You avoided some inconvenience. And you taught your people that strangers are not worth saving. You taught them that compassion is a weakness. You taught them that the measure of a civilization is not in what it gives, but in what it keeps. Thren's face had gone pale. You have no right to lecture us. You are a young species. You do not understand how the galaxy works. No, Amara agreed. We don't understand how your galaxy works. We don't understand a galaxy where 40,000 innocent people can be left to die because helping them is inconvenient. We don't understand a galaxy where compassion is calculated and kindness is conditional. And frankly, counselor, we don't want to understand it. Because that is not the galaxy we want to live in. She paused, letting her words sink in. We are not naive. We know that we cannot save everyone. We know that resources are limited. We know that there will always be more suffering than we can address. But that is not an excuse to do nothing. That is not a reason to close our hearts. Every person we help matters. Every act of kindness counts. Every time we choose compassion over convenience, we make the galaxy a little bit better. A murmur ran through the chamber. Some representatives shook their heads in disapproval. Others leaned forward with interest. A few nodded slowly, as if hearing something they had long wanted to hear. You ask whether intervention is necessary, Amara concluded. I have a different suggestion. Instead of teaching us how to be more like you, perhaps you should consider whether there is something we can teach you. Perhaps you should consider whether the galaxy you have built is really the best you can do. Perhaps you should consider whether there is a better way. She sat down. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to applaud. It was a single representative, a young diplomat from a species called the Renari. Others joined in. Not many, but enough to be heard. Thren called for order. The applause stopped. But something had changed. Something in the atmosphere of the room had shifted. The session continued for several more hours. Nothing was resolved, no actions were taken. But the human speech was broadcast across the galaxy, just like the footage of the refugee welcome. And on 1,000 worlds, people began to ask questions they had never asked before. On the Mordai homeworld, protests erupted for the first time in living memory. Citizens gathered in public squares, demanding that their government reconsider its refugee policy. They held signs with human words that they had learned from the broadcasts. Kindness, compassion, welcome. On the Telari homeworld, scientists began new studies. They examined the human social structure, the human capacity for empathy, the human tendency to help strangers without expecting anything in return. They found no logical explanation, but many of them began to wonder whether logic was the only way to understand the universe. On worlds that had never paid attention to humans before, people watched the broadcasts and felt something stir inside them. Something that had been sleeping for a long time, something that reminded them of what they had once been, before they became civilized and efficient and rational. The Keth Dominion watched all of this in silence. They had expected the Veloxi to die quietly in the darkness of space. They had expected the galaxy to move on and forget. They had not expected a young species on a small blue planet to adopt the refugees as family. And they had not expected that family to fight back. In the refugee complex in Geneva, Ambassador Yanara watched the broadcast of Amara's speech. She watched the small human woman stand alone before the representatives of 200 species and speak truths that no one else had dared to speak. She is extraordinary, Yanara said to her aide. They are all extraordinary. Do you think the council will listen? Her aide asked. I don't know, but I think others will. I think the galaxy is watching. And I think some of them are starting to remember what it means to care. Yanara's glow was shifting through colors that she had not shown in years. Gold and pink and green, swirling together like a sunrise. The humans have given us more than shelter, she said. They have given us an example. They have shown the galaxy what is possible when compassion is not calculated, when kindness is not conditional, when strangers are welcomed as family. She watched Amara on the screen, watched the fire in her eyes, watched the strength in her small frame. The question now is whether the galaxy will listen, whether they will learn, whether they will change. She turned to her aide. But even if they don't, even if nothing else happens, we will remember. We will carry the lesson of the humans with us for as long as our species exists. We will teach our children what kindness looks like. We will tell them stories of the world called Earth, and we will never, ever forget. The aide nodded, her own glow shifting to match Yanara's. Outside, in the complex below, humans and Veloxi worked side by side in the evening light. Children played together in the common areas. Volunteers shared meals with refugees. Laughter mixed with the soft glow of bioluminescent emotions. The galaxy was watching. The galaxy was questioning. The galaxy was beginning to change. And on a small blue planet called Earth, humanity continued to do what came naturally to them. They continued to care. 6 months had passed since the Veloxi arrived on Earth. 6 months of change, of growth, of something that looked very much like healing. The refugee complex in Geneva had been transformed. What had started as temporary shelters had become a thriving community. Permanent buildings rose where tents had once stood. Gardens bloomed with flowers from both Earth and the Veloxi seed banks that had been saved from the convoy. Children attended schools where they learned in both languages. Adults trained for new careers, adapting their skills to their new home. Ambassador Yanara stood on the balcony of her small apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below her, the streets were filled with Veloxi and humans, walking together, talking together, living together. A year ago, she would not have believed this was possible. A year ago, she had been preparing to die in the cold darkness of space, surrounded by her dying people. Now she was watching children play in a garden, watching families share meals, watching hope take root and grow. Her communication device buzzed. It was a message from the Galactic News Network, requesting an interview. They wanted to know how the Veloxi integration was progressing. They wanted to know what lessons could be learned. They wanted to know if the human approach could work elsewhere. Yanara smiled. A year ago, no one in the galaxy would have cared what she thought. Now, she received dozens of interview requests every week. The galaxy was paying attention. The galaxy wanted to know. She accepted the interview and began preparing her thoughts. Across the galaxy, the shockwave of Earth's welcome was still spreading. In ways large and small, species were beginning to question the assumptions they had lived by for centuries. On the Mordai homeworld, Counselor Thren sat in his private study, reading reports that he never would have commissioned a year ago. Studies on the economic impact of refugee acceptance, analyses of social cohesion in diverse communities, research on the long-term benefits of compassionate policy. The numbers were surprising. The data suggested that the humans were not, in fact, suffering from their generosity. Their economy had grown. Their social unity had strengthened. Their global sense of purpose had improved dramatically. Even more surprising was what was happening on Earth's international stage. Countries that had competed and argued for generations were now cooperating on refugee programs. Political divisions that had seemed permanent were healing as people united behind a common cause. The act of helping strangers had somehow helped humans help each other. Thren did not understand it. His models could not explain it. But the data was clear. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant entered, looking nervous. "Sir, there's a situation developing. The Mordai Youth Coalition has organized a demonstration in the capital square. They're demanding that we open our borders to refugees." "How many demonstrators?" "Current estimates suggest over 200,000, sir, and the numbers are growing." Thren closed his eyes. 200,000. That was more than any protest in Mordai history. His species had always prided itself on order, on rationality, on acceptance of logical decisions. Mass demonstrations were something that happened to other, more emotional species. But the humans had changed something. Their broadcasts, their stories, their simple acts of kindness had awakened something in Mordai youth that their elders had long suppressed. "What are they saying?" Thren asked. "They have a slogan, sir. They're calling it, 'Be More Human.'" Thren opened his eyes. "Be more human." A year ago, that phrase would have been an insult. Today, it was a rallying cry. "Sir, what should we do?" Thren was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the old woman with the blankets. He thought about Sophie and her drawings. He thought about Hassan and his recipes. He thought about all the humans who had given everything to strangers, asking nothing in return. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he said finally. "I need to visit the square." His assistant's eyes widened. "Sir, you want to go to the demonstration?" "I want to listen. I want to understand. Perhaps it's time I learned something new." On the Telari homeworld, similar transformations were taking place. The purely logical species had begun to incorporate a new variable into their calculations. The value of compassion. The young scientist named Vex had become something of a celebrity. Her research on human behavior had been published across the galaxy. She had been invited to speak at conferences on dozens of worlds. Her message was simple but revolutionary. Logic alone was not enough. "We have always believed that rational decision-making is the highest form of intelligence," she said in one widely viewed lecture. "We have dismissed emotional responses as primitive, inefficient, counterproductive. But the humans have shown us something different." She displayed a graph showing the economic impact of Earth's refugee program. By every metric we considered important, the humans should have suffered from their decision. They should have experienced resource shortages, social strain, economic decline. Instead, they experienced growth, unity, purpose, joy. She paused, letting the data sink in. "We have been wrong. Emotion is not the opposite of logic. It is a different kind of logic. It is a way of understanding the universe that our models cannot capture. The humans call it, following your heart. We have no equivalent phrase. Perhaps it is time we created one." Her words spread across the Telari homeworld. They sparked debates that had never happened before. They led to policy changes that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The Telari Council voted to establish a refugee assistance program. It was small at first, just a pilot project on a single colony world. But it was a beginning. It was a sign that even the most logical species could learn to value compassion. On other worlds, the changes were even more dramatic. The Renari Empire, a warrior culture that had always valued strength above all else, began to redefine what strength meant. A young Renari commander named Kira, coincidentally sharing a name with the Veloxi child she had seen in the broadcasts, argued that true strength was not the power to destroy but the power to protect. "Any fool can kill," she said in a speech that was shared across Renari space. "It takes no special ability to tear down what others have built, but to protect the weak, to shelter the vulnerable, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. That requires true strength. That requires courage. That requires honor." Her words resonated with a generation of young Renari who had grown tired of their empire's endless wars. They began to question whether conquest was really the highest calling. They began to imagine a different kind of strength. The Keth Dominion watched all of this with growing alarm. They had built their empire on the assumption that the galaxy would remain indifferent to their conquests. They had counted on the cold calculations of other species, the willingness to sacrifice strangers for self-interest. But the humans had broken those calculations. The humans had shown that compassion could spread like wildfire. The humans had proven that kindness was contagious. For the first time, the Keth began to worry. On Earth, life continued in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. The Veloxi community in Geneva had grown roots. Veloxi businesses opened along the main street, offering goods and services that blended their culture with their new home. Veloxi restaurants served dishes that combined Hassan's recipes with traditional Veloxi cooking. Veloxi artists created works that captured the beauty of both worlds. The little girl named Kira had started school. She had learned English fluently within 6 months, picking up languages with the ease of young children everywhere. Her best friend was a human girl named Emma, whose grandmother was the old woman who had wrapped Kira in blankets on the first day. The two girls were inseparable. They studied together, played together, dreamed together. Emma wanted to be a doctor who helped refugees. Kira wanted to be an ambassador who brought species together. They made plans to do both. Together, When they grew up, their friendship was replicated across the community. Human and Veloxi children grew up side by side, forming bonds that would last a lifetime. They did not see each other as different species. They saw each other as friends, as family, as part of the same community. The adults watched and learned. Many humans who had been nervous about the refugees at first had become their strongest supporters. They had discovered that the Veloxi were not so different from them. They had the same hopes, the same fears, the same dreams. They loved their children. They mourned their losses. They laughed and cried and celebrated in ways that humans could understand. The differences that remained became sources of fascination rather than fear. Humans loved learning about Veloxi bioluminescence, about their history, about their culture. Veloxi loved learning about human music, about human sports, about human traditions. The exchange went both ways, enriching everyone involved. Ambassador Yanara's interview with the Galactic News Network was broadcast across known space. Billions of beings watched as she answered questions about the human approach to refugee integration. What is the secret of the human method? The interviewer asked. Yanara considered the question carefully. I don't think there is a secret, she said finally. I think the humans simply do what comes naturally to them. They see suffering, and they respond with kindness. They see strangers, and they offer friendship. They see need, and they try to help. But surely there must be some special technique, some policy innovation that makes their approach so successful. The technique is love, Yanara said. The innovation is treating refugees as people rather than problems. The humans don't ask what we can do for them. They ask what they can do for us. That is not a policy. That is a philosophy. That is a way of being in the universe. The interviewer pressed further. Some critics say that the human approach is unsustainable. They say that Earth cannot continue to accept refugees indefinitely. They say that the kindness will eventually run out. Yanara's glow shifted to a warm gold. I have been on Earth for 6 months now. I have watched the humans closely, and I can tell you that their kindness does not run out. It is not a resource that depletes. It is a muscle that grows stronger with use. She leaned forward, her light brightening. When humans help others, they do not become weaker. They become stronger. When they give, they do not become poorer. They become richer. This is the secret that the galaxy has forgotten. Kindness is not a finite resource. It is infinite. The more you give, the more you have. The interview continued, but those words spread further than any others. They were quoted in academic papers and political speeches. They were discussed in cafes and classrooms. They became a kind of manifesto for a movement that was growing across the stars. In the weeks that followed, more species began to change their policies. The Mordai announced a new refugee program, small but significant. The Telari expanded their pilot project to 3 more worlds. The Renari established a protection force dedicated to defending vulnerable populations. None of these changes were dramatic. None of them transformed the galaxy overnight. But together, they represented something new. They represented a shift in how species thought about each other. They represented the beginning of a new philosophy. The Keth Dominion made their move 3 months later. They had been planning another conquest, a small world called Venor that had valuable mineral deposits. The Venori were a peaceful species, technologically advanced, but militarily weak. They would have been easy prey. But when the Keth fleet arrived at Venor, they found something unexpected. A coalition of ships from 12 different species had gathered to defend the small world. Mordai warships flew beside Telari science vessels. Renari cruisers flanked human destroyers. The combined fleet was not large enough to defeat the Keth, but it was large enough to make victory costly. More importantly, the coalition broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. The age of conquest is over, the message declared. The age of compassion has begun. We will no longer stand by while innocent species are destroyed. We will no longer calculate the cost of intervention while children die. We will protect the vulnerable. We will defend the weak. We will be better than we have been. The Keth fleet hesitated. They had the firepower to win the battle, but they could not win the war that would follow. The coalition represented something new, something they had not anticipated. It represented a galaxy that was beginning to stand together. After a tense standoff that lasted 3 days, the Keth fleet withdrew. It was not a permanent solution. The Keth would be back. But it was a victory, perhaps the first of many. On Earth, News of the standoff was celebrated. Humans who had never paid attention to galactic politics suddenly felt connected to something larger than themselves. They had started a movement by helping refugees. Now that movement was protecting entire worlds. In the Geneva community, Kira and Emma watched the news together. They were too young to understand the politics, but they understood the feeling. They understood that something good was happening because people had chosen to be kind. "Do you think there will be more wars?" Emma asked. Kira's glow shifted to a thoughtful green. "I think there will always be people who want to hurt others," she said. "But I think there will also always be people who want to help. And I think the helpers are getting stronger." Emma nodded. "We're going to be helpers when we grow up." "Yes," Kira agreed. "The best helpers in the whole galaxy." They held hands and watched the screens showing the Coalition fleet, standing guard over a world full of strangers who had become family. In her apartment, Ambassador Yanara watched the same broadcast. She thought about everything that had happened since that desperate transmission, since that moment when she had expected rejection and received welcome instead. The humans had changed her. They had changed her people. They had changed the galaxy, and they were just getting started. She began composing a new message to Amara Okonkwo. There was work to do. There were alliances to build. There was a future to create. The shockwave of human kindness was still spreading, and Yanara was determined to help it reach every corner of the stars. 5 years had passed since the Veloxy convoy limped into Earth's orbit. 5 years since an old woman wrapped a blanket around a frightened child. 5 years since the galaxy began to change. Ambassador Yanara stood at the podium of the Galactic Assembly, looking out at representatives from over 300 species. The great chamber was filled to capacity, with overflow crowds watching on screens throughout the building and across the stars. She was no longer called ambassador. The Veloxy had become citizens of Earth, and Yanara had become something more than a diplomat. She had become a symbol, a voice, a reminder of what was possible when strangers chose to become family. Today was the signing of the Galactic Compassion Accord. The document represented everything that had changed in the past 5 years. It guaranteed protection for displaced peoples across known space. It established permanent funds for refugee assistance. It created a coalition of species committed to defending the vulnerable. 23 species had already signed. More were expected to follow. It was not a perfect document. It did not solve every problem. But it was a beginning, a foundation, a promise. Yanara cleared her throat and began to speak. 5 years ago, my people were dying. We had lost our homeworld. We had been rejected by 17 species. We were drifting through the darkness, waiting for the end. Her glow was steady and bright, a calm blue that signified deep reflection. Then we received a message from a species we had never met. A young species, barely known in galactic politics. They said 4 simple words. "We're coming to get you." She paused, letting the memory wash over her. We did not understand. We had been rejected so many times. We had learned to expect nothing from the galaxy. Why would these strangers, these humans, risk so much for people they had never met? The answer, I have come to understand, is that they did not see us as strangers. They saw us as people. They saw children who needed help. They saw elders who needed care. They saw families who needed home. And they responded the only way they knew how. With open arms, with warm hearts, with love. She looked across the chamber at the human delegation. Director Amara Okonkwo sat in the front row, her hair now fully gray, her eyes still bright with purpose. Beside her sat representatives from every continent, every nation, every corner of the small blue world that had changed the galaxy. The humans taught us something that we had forgotten, Yanara continued. They taught us that kindness is not weakness, that compassion is not foolishness, that the measure of a civilization is not in the power it wields, but in the mercy it shows. She gestured to the document before her. This accord is not the end of our journey. It is the beginning. It is a promise that we will not go back to the old ways. It is a commitment that we will protect each other, defend each other, care for each other. It is a declaration that the age of indifference is over. She looked at Councillor Thren, who sat in his customary seat but who had changed so much in 5 years. He had resigned from the council and taken a position with the new Galactic Refugee Initiative. He had become one of its most effective advocates. To those who have already signed, I say thank you. You have chosen to be part of something greater than yourselves. You have chosen to remember what civilization is truly for. She looked at the species who had not yet signed, who were still watching, still calculating, still wondering if compassion was worth the cost. To those who are still deciding, I say this: the choice before you is not just a political decision. It is a moral one. It is a choice about what kind of galaxy we want to live in. A galaxy where the strong prey on the weak and the vulnerable are left to die, or a galaxy where we lift each other up, protect each other, make each other stronger. Her glow shifted to gold, warm and bright. I know which galaxy I want. I know which galaxy my children want. I know which galaxy the humans showed us is possible. She picked up the ceremonial pen. On behalf of the Veloxi people, citizens of Earth, and of the galaxy, I am honored to add my signature to this accord. May it stand as a testament to what we can achieve when we choose kindness over calculation, when we choose compassion over convenience, when we choose love over fear. She signed her name. The chamber erupted in applause. The ceremony continued for several hours as representative after representative stepped forward to add their signatures. Some did so with enthusiasm, some with reluctance, some with tears in their eyes, but one by one, they committed their species to a new way of being. When the last signature was complete, the chamber fell silent. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single voice began to sing. It was a human voice, singing a human song. A song about overcoming, about perseverance, about hope. Other humans joined in. Then Veloxi added their voices, their songs blending harmoniously with the human melody. Then Mordai, then Telari, then Renari, then species after species until the entire chamber was filled with music. No one had planned it. No one had organized it. It simply happened, spontaneously, as beings from across the galaxy chose to raise their voices together. In the front row, Amara Okonkwo wept openly. Yanara stood beside her, glowing every color of the rainbow, unable to contain the joy that overwhelmed her. This was what they had built. This was what the humans had started. This was what the galaxy had become. After the ceremony, Yanara found Amara in a quiet garden outside the assembly building. The human woman sat on a bench, looking at the stars that were beginning to appear in the evening sky. "May I join you?" Yanara asked. Of course. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. The sounds of celebration echoed from the building behind them. But out here, there was peace. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Yanara asked finally. "On that first day in your office in Geneva?" Amara smiled. "I said a lot of things that day. I was nervous. I'd never met an alien before. You said, 'Welcome home.' I remember." Yanara's glow softened to a gentle pink. "I did not believe you then. I thought it was just words, just a diplomatic phrase. But you meant it, didn't you? You truly meant it." "Of course I meant it. You needed a home. We had one to share. It wasn't complicated. It was complicated to everyone else. The galaxy had never seen anything like what you did." Amara shrugged. "The galaxy had forgotten some things. We just reminded them. You did more than remind. You changed everything. You changed us. You changed species who had been set in their ways for thousands of years. You changed the very nature of galactic civilization. We just did what was right." Yanara shook her head. "You make it sound so simple. But I have studied humans for 5 years now. I have lived among you, worked with you, raised my children beside yours. I know that it was not simple. I know how hard your people worked. I know the sacrifices they made. I know the opposition they faced." She turned to face Amara directly. "You did not just do what was right. You fought for what was right. You insisted on what was right. You refused to let anyone tell you that compassion was impractical or inefficient or naive. You held on to your values when it would have been easier to let them go. That's just being human." "No," Yanara said firmly. "That is being the best kind of human. That is being what all species should aspire to be. That is the gift you have given the galaxy." They sat in silence again, watching more stars appear. Somewhere in the distance, the music from the celebration shifted to a new song, one that blended human and Veloxi melodies in ways that would have been impossible 5 years ago. "What happens now?" Amara asked. "Now we build. Now we grow. Now we spread this new way of being to every corner of the stars. Will it last?" Yanara considered the question carefully. "I do not know. There will be setbacks. There will be failures. There will be those who cling to the old ways and fight against the new. The Keth have not surrendered. Other threats will emerge. But I believe in what we have started. I believe in the movement that your people created. I believe that kindness, once kindled, is very hard to extinguish. She gestured at the stars above them. 5 years ago, those stars seemed so cold to me, so empty, so hostile. Now, when I look at them, I see something different. I see worlds where children are learning about human compassion. I see species that are questioning centuries of indifference. I see a galaxy that is slowly, hesitantly, beautifully, learning to care. Amara nodded slowly. My grandmother would have liked to see this. I think she does see it. I think she sees it through you. They sat together until the stars filled the sky, until the celebration wound down, until the new day began to dawn. On Earth, in the community that had grown from the Geneva refugee complex, life went on. Kira was 12 now, tall and graceful and glowing with the confidence of youth. She had become a leader among the young Veloxi, a voice for her generation. She still wanted to be an ambassador, and her teachers said she had the skills for it. Emma remained her best friend. The human girl had grown into a young woman with her grandmother's kind eyes and her own fierce determination. She was studying medicine now, preparing for a career helping refugees across the galaxy. The two girls sat in the garden that Yanara had helped plant 5 years ago. The flowers that bloomed there came from a dozen worlds, a living symbol of the community that had grown from tragedy. Do you ever think about what would have happened? Emma asked. If we hadn't helped? If the convoy had just kept drifting? Kira's glow flickered briefly, a shadow of old pain crossing her features. Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about how close we came to losing everything. I can't imagine a world without you. I can't imagine a world without humans. They smiled at each other, the easy smile of old friends who had grown up together. My mother told me something once, Kira said. She said that before Earth, she had given up hope. She had accepted that we were going to die. She had made peace with it. That's so sad. It was. But she said something else too. She said that when the human ships appeared, when she heard those messages of welcome, something inside her came back to life, something she thought was dead forever. What was it? Faith, Kira said. Faith in the goodness of others. Faith in the possibility of kindness. Faith in the future. She looked at the garden around them, at the flowers blooming in colors that spanned 2 worlds. The humans gave us more than a home. They gave us back our faith. They showed us that the universe is not as cold and cruel as we had come to believe. They proved that strangers can become family, that help can come from unexpected places, that love can overcome everything. Emma reached out and took her friend's hand. That's what humanity does best. We help. We care. We love. I know. I've seen it. I've lived it. Kira squeezed her hand. And I'm going to spend my life spreading it to the rest of the galaxy. Every species deserves to know what we learned. Every species deserves to feel what we felt when those ships appeared in our darkest hour. We'll do it together. Always. They sat in the garden as the sun set. 2 young women from different worlds, united by a bond that no darkness could break. The Galactic Compassion Accord had been signed. The coalition that had defended Venar had grown into a permanent alliance. The Keth Dominion had begun to fracture as its subject species rose up, inspired by the example of galactic solidarity. But these were just the visible changes. The deeper transformation was happening in hearts and minds across the stars. It was happening in classrooms where children learned about human kindness. It was happening in homes where families discussed what it meant to help strangers. It was happening in governments where leaders questioned old assumptions and imagined new possibilities. The galaxy was changing. Slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. The shockwave that had started with a blanket wrapped around a child was still spreading, still growing, still transforming everything it touched. In the great archive of the Mordai, where the history of galactic civilization was recorded, a new section had been created. It was titled, The Human Era. It documented everything that had happened since that first transmission, since that first welcome, since that first act of unconditional kindness. Counselor Thren, now retired from politics but still active in the refugee initiative, had written the introduction to this section. His words were displayed at the entrance for all visitors to read. We thought humans were young and naive. We thought their compassion was a weakness that would fade. We thought we understood how the galaxy worked, and they did not. We were wrong. About everything. The humans did not change despite the galaxy. They changed the galaxy despite itself. They proved that kindness is not weakness but strength. They proved that compassion is not foolishness but wisdom. They proved that civilization is not measured by the power we wield but by the mercy we show. The history of our galaxy will be divided into two eras. Before the humans reminded us who we could be, and after. May we never forget the lesson they taught us. May we never return to the cold indifference of the past. May we always strive to be, as our young people say, more human. The words stood as a testament to what had happened, a memorial to what had changed, and across the galaxy, in places too numerous to count, beings of every species looked at the stars and felt something that had been missing for far too long. They felt hope. They felt connection. They felt the warmth of belonging to something greater than themselves. They felt, for the first time in millennia, that the universe was not cold and empty and hostile. They felt, thanks to a small blue planet called Earth and the remarkable species that called it home, that they were not alone, and they never would be again.